There it is. I got it.
All right. Thank you very much. Just thank you to everybody in attendance. You are in the City of Salem's Finance Committee meeting dated April 17th, 4 p.m. I'm the chair, Jose Gonzalez, and I'll give the other members a chance to introduce themselves.
Councilor Nishioka.
Councilor Mickey Varney, Ward 8.
All right, I think we have a few staff if they want to introduce themselves too.
I'm Jennifer.
Go ahead, Jenny. Sorry.
I'm Jennifer Matichek. I am the chief accountant for the city of Salem.
I am Keith Staley, the city manager.
Josh Eggleston, Chief Financial Officer.
And Kelly Blake-Schmidt, Management Analyst.
Nice, thank you so much. So first, let's see, on the agenda, we need to approve our minutes. And I guess we have two, February 3rd. Oh yeah, so two different sets of minutes we have to approve. First one is from our February 3rd, 2023 minutes. So I'd entertain a motion.
I move that we approve the minutes from February 3rd.
Linda, you're trying to second? Okay, sounds good. Hi, Deanna. Councilor Gwen, how are you?
Good. Sorry about that. I was on the phone.
That's okay. Yeah, we just got a motion and a second to approve February 3rd minutes. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye or finger. Okay. Any opposed? No. Okay, we're good. Same. I'm asking for a motion to approve our February 13th minutes.
Motion to approve the February 13th minutes.
I'll second.
Okay. Well, motion made by Councilmember Varney and seconded by Gwen. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. Any opposed? Don't see any, so we have our minutes passed. Okay. Section 3, public comment. Josh, do we have anybody wishing to address this committee?
We do not, Mr. Chair.
I don't know. I don't see any action items for number 4, so we'll just right into unless there's any changes there, Josh.
No, there's not.
Okay, and so we'll go to number 5. Let's see, federal grant compliance audit, and then the revenue options of the city services to sustain them. Josh, handing it over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'm actually going to turn it over to Jenny Matichek, our chief accountant, and she can give an overview of what the federal grant compliance audit is and why we should care about it.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Josh. Yes, so we've brought to you as an information-only item the results of our fiscal year 2022 federal grants compliance report. So this is a requirement for any agency receiving federal grants, and specifically over $750,000, including subawardees. So, you know, with the ARPA funds, we provided subawards to multiple different awardees, and they would also be under this requirement if they were over $750,000. It was a clean audit, no issues. The timing is a little bit different than the ACFR. So the ACFR is due 6 months after your fiscal year ends, so December 31st, and then you have 9 months for the federal grants compliance. So we met that March 31st deadline for issuing that. And this year we had 3 major programs that were tested as part of the audit, one including ARPA. And all of them came back clean, and it was a pretty smooth audit, which was necessary after the struggles we had with the ACFR. So it was very nice to get this done and in a clean and easy fashion. Are there any questions about the report or the audit that I can help answer?
You know, I don't see any questions. I don't have any, and not on my end.
I do not.
It's probably one of the shortest documents we produce. If you take a look at it, attached to your report, but it's also, some of the largest dollars we received from another agency, specifically the federal government. This is a bigger year for us, just because the quantity of ARPA funds that we recognized during fiscal year 2022. So from my point of view, I was really pleased to see that it tested well and it came back clean. But feel free as you read through it, if you read through it, to reach out if you have any questions.
So thank you, Josh. Yeah, I mean, I was surprised too that there was only 19 pages on this. I thought it was gonna be 190. That's what I thought at first, so. Yeah, no, I mean, in a way, it's good news. It seems like everything's in line. The way I'd see it is no red flags, correct?
Yes, that's correct. Yeah,
Congratulations.
thank you. The way we say it, it's a clean audit. I mean, just like Jenny said, there were no findings.
Good, okay. Anything else on 5A, Josh or Jennifer?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Well, thank you. In that case, 5B.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have this on here just as an opportunity for the Finance Committee to have any discussion or questions they might have. This proposal for additional revenue originally came from the Finance Committee several months ago. There's been a couple council work sessions since then. And I didn't know if the Finance Committee would like an opportunity to discuss any additional pieces of information or anything that could be helpful as the City Council considers revenue options.
Thank you, Josh. No wonder I didn't see any attachments.
I didn't.
I appreciate the work sessions we had, our previous Finance Committee meetings. Definitely a lot to talk about. Do any members have any follow-ups based on everything I appreciate Council Member Varney for her honesty. It's really great to hear her opinion and her thoughts. I want to thank you.
From the work session or from which?
Yeah, the work session. That was.
Thank you.
But yeah,
Well,
this is a time. Go ahead.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, it was just for me to let you talk.
Oh, okay. Okay. Well, thank you. Since the work session, I've had some other thoughts as well. And I guess I wanted to ask how we move forward in terms of discussing more ideas and options, because I really don't know how to, because I think I, as well as other counselors, have been, mulling these things over, and I guess I just don't know where we go next.
Yeah, really good question. We are moving forward with the focus groups. I think they're scheduled here in the next few weeks. So our intent after that point would be to reconvene council, either in small groups or at a work session. Either way, we'll likely have a work session to review the findings for the council to discuss as a whole. But that would be the next step. So my goal of having this on the agenda, as well as hearing from individual counselors, is to make sure, we provide any information that you all might need as you're considering the proposals.
Okay. Go ahead.
Oh, I just whenever you're finished. So, Councilor Nishioka here. I have been listening to constituents and business owners. And one thing that I will say, I think there's, for business owners especially, there's quite a concern about the employee tax. And I question whether or not they understand that it's an employee tax, but yet they would be responsible for managing it, such as putting funds into a secure account and then having those available. That's the way I understand it. They would have to set this money aside, but it's actually the employee that will be paying it, or does the employer have to be the one that sends it in, submits it? Can you clarify that?
Yeah, absolutely. So the employee is the person who ultimately is charged. it's deducted from their wages, just like all the other taxes. If you're paid, with a paycheck. What happens is the employers will collect that and then they'll remit it to the city on a quarterly basis. So they'll hold it and then they'll do a quarterly payment of those wages. So it's a little bit of both, right? So it's collected from employees, but it's paid from the employer to the city.
And do you feel, Josh, that I'm sure the learning curve will be initially time consuming, but after that process, do you feel that it will be a huge impact to the employer as far as time, effort, responsibilities? I'm just curious because, again, I think that there are some businesses that are apprehensive because I think they feel that it will be a burden.
I won't say it won't have an impact because it will, right? Any additional administrative task has an impact. I think it'll become just like other quarterly payroll taxes that employers are responsible for, FICA, Medicare, unemployment, state income taxes, things like that. So yes, initially it'll be probably a larger impact. And for us, it'll be a communication education role. But then eventually, I think probably, 3 years down the road, it won't be an impact like we're expecting right now. Other places in the state, they have this right now, and they have for, a couple decades in some cases. So it's just unusual for Salem. But eventually after the learning curve, it should just settle into the normal rhythm of business.
Hey, can I add something? Mr. Chair, this is Keith here.
Yes, Steve, go for it.
Thanks. I think it also is important for us, though, to think about this in terms of the business owners and their ability to implement this. And that's where we need to be careful with making it overly complex. I think one of the things that we heard from our friends down in Eugene was just the complexity of the program and the initial startup and the ongoing operations there. So it's something for us to consider. I was in a meeting over at SEDCOR the other day, and I just walked in, and the meeting hadn't even started, and folks were eating their lunch, and a couple of business owners were talking between themselves, and they were just talking about both of them have businesses within the metro area and the implications and impacts from an administrative perspective of having to comply and the ongoing responsibilities there. So there's certain, I think, your questions, Councilmember Nishioka, are good questions. How our business is going to receive this. And I think that to some extent is going to depend on how complicated we make it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a
Nishioka.
couple of questions.
Yes, go for it.
One is, how will we keep track of the businesses? I know we discussed this a little bit at the work session, but I think we were talking about possibly registration just to have a database. Do state agencies have to do that if they have a headquarters located in the metro area, or how does that work?
So I'm going to separate out a little bit. So business registration could be a separate and distinct piece from a payroll tax, but for the payroll tax specifically, yes, you'd have to register just for the reporting and payment piece. And that would be anyone who pays wages. So I'm not sure if all state agencies would have to register, or if, like, for example, DAS, if there as their payroll piece, would register and remit for all the other agencies. I'm not quite sure how that would work. But yes, that's correct.
Okay, thank you. Another point I wanted to bring up was when we discussed remote working earlier. I work for a state agency, and everybody seems to have a different schedule. And one of the things that concerns me about us implementing a payroll tax where we are tracking individuals that maybe work for outside employers, but come into Salem, et cetera, et cetera. I personally think it would be better to focus on the employers right in the Salem metro area, but include any of their workers who are working hybrid who might be outside of the area. And the reason I say that is because the hybrid work schedule model is not in statute, and it's not actually in our bargaining contracts to the best of my knowledge. And so what concerns me is that flexibility, not flexibility, the liquidity, the changes in that schedule, because I can submit a change and have mine changed in 2 weeks. So I'm trying to make this a little bit easier by taking that hybrid option thing out of it. And I don't know how others feel about that.
That's a good question, Varney. Any feedback from the staff? I mean, I know that this is, yeah, that's a good point. If it's not in statute, that's a good point.
I can revisit the discussion. In conversations with the legal department, they had concerns about our ability to actually assess taxes on those not working in Salem. So even though the employer is located here, there was concern about, hey, if this person works up in Wilsonville and they never actually are in Salem, do we really have the jurisdiction to tax their wages? It is what Eugene is doing. Their taxes based on the employer location, their headquarters, not where the work is performed. So clearly there's some precedent there, but we can definitely revisit that and come back with some. Oh, there's Dan. Go ahead, Dan.
What Josh said is correct. I haven't drilled down into this, but I'm fairly certain, for an employer who's outside the city limits, we have no authority to regulate their behavior outside the city. So we can't require an employer whose situs is located outside the city to remit wages for an employee who comes into the city to do the work. Now we have jurisdiction over that employee because they're inside the city, but we can't get the employer to withhold it for us.
So I think, Dan, this would be the inverse. The employer is located in Salem and the worker is not working in Salem.
Right, and I understood that was the question, but I'm not positive on that. I have a concern that, because Eugene has both an employer and an employee payroll tax, and I don't know if that makes a difference. And I know you cited other examples as well where you can where they've done that. I think it's a little bit easier to get there because the employee is employed from a Salem-based employer, and there's some nexus there where we say we have some regulatory authority over that employee, but it's a little bit less certain in my mind.
Thanks, Dan.
Member Varney.
I wanted to make a quick comment on that. At least with state agencies, each employee has a main work site that they work out of. Even those that are working remotely 100% of the time, they still have a work site within where their employee is. I believe. So I guess, for instance, my work site is Salem headquarters. So is a coworker of mine who's a biometrician that lives in Lincoln City. Her work site is still Salem.
Yeah, we'll look at that again and just see if we can get to a spot where it looks a little bit more comfortable to go with that route. But if that's what the finance committee's a consensus, we can definitely look at that.
Josh, yeah, I think if we just look back at our session, whenever this gets brought up, there's a lot of these types of examples. And, I'm not saying we're going to be able to answer all of them, but at least if we're aware and we can have some idea, at least we can provide information to our constituents. I remember this, I think I don't know if it was the Oregon Saves or there was another program, and they came and presented to a group that I was part of, and had a little tension only because there were so many. Not sure yet. We don't know yet. It just we knew they were here early to share information, but at that moment, the actual employees were like, "How is this going to affect me?" You know. Any other comments? I have a few comments. Question. Anybody else? Anybody else on the committee?
I
Yeah,
still have.
Ronnie, yeah. Oh, then keep going.
I
Keep
didn't
going.
know, I didn't know if you could see me or not.
Yeah.
At the work session, we talked about taking this to the voters. I would like some input about how you feel about implementing if we were to do it implement it ourselves, yet have a sunset clause on it. And the reason that I think a sunset clause would be beneficial is, we can't really determine what the long-term consequences of this is going to be. And I know we're going to have a lot of changes. But then alternatively, just because if we were to implement it, it doesn't mean that we can't change how it's implemented. I was just kind of throwing that thought out there. Sometimes if we do decide to take it to the voters, having a sunset clause within it sometimes helps it be a little bit easier to swallow as well. I'm just throwing some thoughts out there.
Thank you, Member Barney. Thank you. Those are real. Member Nishioka.
Thank you, Chair Gonzalez. So following up with Councilor Barney's comments, this brings into question, if doing a sunset, then it starts to feel like, as has been discussed, levies have to keep being brought forward. And so it's like, if we, I guess I'm trying to understand the next budget cycle, the expectations would be that employee tax would still be enforced and probably enforced for some time, but there then may be in 10 years from now, another budgetary crisis in a sense, or deficit that then we'll need to bring something else forward. And I'm kind of trying to understand doing a sunset clause, even though it may be easier for voters to vote for, would that potentially make us in a worse condition 5 or 10 years from now? I'm just trying to understand the forecasting. We're trying to make up for a lot now, but I have no idea what we may have to make up for in 5 years or 10 years. And so not having had any history on council before, I don't quite know what to expect. And that can have a huge impact on how I might consider options that we have and how I go forth in communicating with our constituents. Those are my thoughts.
And if I could respond real briefly, I appreciate the long-term thinking. I think that's helpful because we are looking at, long-term issues. It's taken a long time to develop. We are trying to solve it relatively quickly. But you're absolutely right. I mean, there could definitely be an additional challenge in the next 5 to 10 years. And if you have a sunset clause, you could be faced with, in 5 years, you have to redo or do something with the payroll tax, then you have an additional challenge you're trying to solve also. So it does create uncertainty. I would recommend, if you do have a sunset clause, make sure it's far enough out that you're able to actually get the payroll tax up and running and show some progress. And then I'd recommend, I really don't recommend a sunset, but if you were to move forward with it, to make sure that you ask the question well before the actual sunset, if that makes sense, so that you're not actually having a budget year where you have that uncertainty. You're asking the question, well in advance of when the revenue would actually stop.
Initially, Josh, I know that purpose of raising the funds was because of the upcoming gap or cliff or whatever it was called. And but really after that, I mean, how far do we project? I mean, or else, what are we, 2023? Or else the 2016-17 council should have solved our problems, you know? So since, you know, we can't go back and really can't go forward too much, and I know that was something that's been a little different as it's seen us trying to add revenue and not just cover, but also add, and for how long, you know. So I mean, nobody can really tell the future. Don't know what position we'd be in there, and I think that's why there's always that. To me, I think that's why the sunset clause for a lot of people makes sense, because we're like, well, solve this and then let's reassess, even though it does seem like more work. I think that's why I think why people are talking about it. I mean, that's why I would think that. Any other thoughts from the committee? Yeah, Member Nishioka.
Thank you. I like to ask questions, and I don't always do it very eloquently, but hopefully you'll understand. So as we've been discussing the employee tax, that would not even begin until January 25. Because it will take some time to get it in place. And then I'm guessing that it's going to take a couple years for us to really see what that brings forward, or at least 18 months, I would assume. And so a sunset clause would really be not until probably 29 or 30, I'm thinking. And so again, boy, after putting all the money into the software program, and then everybody says, nope, we don't want it anymore, and be like, wow, well, that was a big expense. So anyway, I'm just trying to understand when you might see the return, and how the employee tax is doing in the sense of what we had hoped it would accomplish. Long question.
Yeah, I appreciate the question. So we are looking at a January 2025 implementation if we know, say by November of this year, that it's moving forward, and we can add the staffing right away. Because there's quite an administrative effort to get it going, and then communication with employers and employees. We did discount the revenue, and then we have in our forecast, we have it coming back over the next couple of years. So we have a 20% initial discount, and then bring back 5% for the next couple of years to get to where we're at 90% of what the DOR says we have in our area. So I feel like we're taking a pretty conservative approach. Again, you're absolutely right. We won't know for sure until we get probably a good 3 quarters, of reporting and payments. And again, it might be that we just get a delay in revenue. It's not that we won't collect it. It just might not appear right away. So it's like a couple quarters for employers to really figure out the software, figure out the system. And then we're working on compliance mechanisms, or we will be working on compliance mechanisms, like data sharing with the Department of Revenue and other agencies to identify employers in Salem.
Thank you, Josh. Thank you, Member Nishioka. Questions or thoughts? Anybody else?
I have another one.
Member Barney. Of course.
I'm curious about the focus groups. I think that's what Josh said. What are they going to look like?
Really good question. And I don't have that in front of me. We can send out a summary of what the focus groups, what we're thinking. I know Courtney's been working with DHM on that. We had a meeting last week or the week before with DHM to really go over. Keith, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, all that I can add at this point is that they would be a statistically representative group of likely voters. So the consulting firm would identify a group of likely voters. They would develop focus groups based on the demographics of that group of individuals, and that's who would be in the focus group. it would not be just a randomly selected group of residents. It would be very specifically tailored to individuals who are likely to vote.
Member Nishioka, you have a question?
I do.
Yes.
Has the city heard from any of the unions that would need to participate, such as the fire or police union or any other large unions, if they're opposed to this or not?
Not to my knowledge.
Thank you. And going back to, thank you, Member Nishioka, your comments, Keith. So these focus groups are, this is just regards to us crafting our message so it can pass. So it's more just to gather voter feedback so we can be better positioned. Initially, and maybe we didn't ask enough questions, because initially I thought it was just to get feedback on our communities input with regard to some of these ideas. Because if that's the case, and I can tell you that a lot of people that are invisible politically aren't going to be given an opportunity to talk about something that's going to impact them directly. So in this case, it's just for political reasons we're getting these people together.
I don't know as I would define it just as political reasons, but it's definitely for fine-tuning a proposal. And then we would do a community-wide survey, a randomly generated, statistically valid survey of the community to find out again how a proposal or proposals would fare going forward. Ultimately, what's important in this question is this a viable path forward? And under what terms and conditions would it be viable? So, that's what the consultant is going to be probing for is there, we had 3 different proposals that we considered the last month or I guess it was April 5th at the in the work session. So how does the community, do these focus groups react to those 3 different proposals? We had included some new services. How does the community or these focus groups react to those new services? How could this be refined? We had talked about asking the community about, council vote, no vote. Frankly, the consultant said that's not really even a question that you need to ask. He's been doing this for over 20 years, and he can tell you absolutely the citizens are going to say, given the choice between participating and not participating in the decision, they're going to say, we want to participate. But
So are we leaning that way? That we'll take it to the voters then, or are we?
I'm not sure how we're leaning at this point. I think there's a lot of discussion yet to be had on that question.
One of the things we're trying to get from the focus groups is talking about the rate structure. So talking about the rate and the services, and then there was some discussion about a lower income discount or exemption. So also looking to the focus groups for feedback on that also.
Mm-hmm.
It just seems like if we're going to get focus groups together, we better be doing it because we don't have a lot of time, do we?
We are doing it as we speak. We have the consultant under contract, and they are moving forward with whatever magic they do to identify individuals. They actually pay people to come in and participate in the process. So it's very, very much like a focus group for a marketing campaign or something, like a commercial product, if you will.
Thank you. City Attorney Dan Atchison.
Just to respond to Councilor Hoy's question about how we're leaning on whether to refer it to the voters or not, that's
Councilor
something
Gwen.
that City Council.
I'm Councilor Gwen.
Oh, my goodness, I'm so sorry.
It's joking.
It's been a long day for me, but I apologize. But at any rate, that's a essentially a political question that council would decide. I don't even know, of course, it'd be up to the city manager, but typically staff wouldn't even make a recommendation on that. That would be something that the council needs to kind of wrap its arms around and figure out how it's going to go.
Thank you, City Attorney Dan. I think, and that's why I think for me the question is, and I think that's why some of these questions are, who are going to sit on these community panels? Who's going to be a part of those focus groups? And I think that's why. I think it's helping us know based on, because the idea is we're going to go to them for feedback. So once that feedback comes, is what filter are we going to use? These potential voters, or these just community members, and then. So I think I'm sure we'll find out with time all these details. Okay. I have a few comments. The first one, and this goes to my second one, but in our last finance committee meeting, and I think the first work session, Mayor Hoy and I brought up the same thing about what are some of the areas we can make cuts if this doesn't go. What are some of the trade-offs? What are some of the just based on feedback from staff, is there something that we could do better? Are there things that they want to do more than maybe we let go of some things? I haven't seen any of that yet, because the last thing that we really haven't really considered it, and I'm sure it'll show up at some point, is opposition, is organized opposition to this. That's something that I think someone mentioned at the very, very beginning, but I haven't heard anybody address that. And based on what we're going to, and we don't know what's going to happen yet, but it's potentially there, because it was there. There was a hint of it last time.
So,
go ahead, Keith.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I can only speak in generalities at this point, but the magnitude of the reductions that we're talking about in order to close a budgetary gap of $19 million, that's 10% of our general fund. So that isn't going to come from things like holding vacant positions open or reducing our travel and training budgets and our expenditures on services and supplies. That's going to result in a reduction in force. That may mean, leaving police officer positions vacant, closing fire stations. It is going to affect literally all of our operations, and there's no path forward where all of our operations are not affected by this when we're talking about that magnitude of dollar figure, a 10% reduction in our general fund. And then there's the issue related to supporting the ongoing homeless response services that we're spending, somewhere plus or minus $10 million a year on right now. After June 30th, 2025, there will be no ongoing homeless response services. We will have exhausted our state and federal funding for those services, and without additional funds, we will be either from the state or from our own community, we will be out of those businesses. So, that's, when you put that all together, that's in the range of, $29 million. And the proposal that we talked about, the other day at council, contemplates eliminating that again without, additional revenue. So, obviously, as we get into this, further, we'll have additional conversations about, specifically what that means. But, think about things proportionately, and think about the police department and fire department budgets are in excess of $60 million each. So, taking 10% out of them is a huge bite. Obviously, things like the library and general services is smaller, but still, proportionally, you start taking 10% out of the library, or even 15 or 20% out of the library or out of general services. And it's it's a huge and traumatic impact on our organization. So I can't under represent the impacts that would have. And frankly, that's, what gives me the most amount of, indigestion going forward, is looking at not this coming year's budget, but next year's budget. Our 2025 budget is when things start to get really scary. And then, of course, 26, if we do not have additional revenues, we will be a very different organization.
Keith, and I thank you for the answer. I got the same answer from Josh, and I think maybe when I asked it, you guys jumped to extremes, because never did I say we're going to solve this by budget cuts. Never once.
No, right. I understand.
So I don't know why that's where everybody goes to. What I'm talking about is what a normal person would do in their own budget. They're going to go around and say, where can I cut? Maybe I'm not going to get the full package of cable. I'm going to start there. Maybe I'm going to cut, because as you're talking about the future, long term, if we can't show to our voters, and sometimes I think the city does a lot of work that nobody sees. City employees are taking on extra responsibilities, and that's the problem. They don't see it. So as we're going to the voters to say, here's our process to evaluate, how we're spending our money today. We can't do it all, and here are some areas that we're going to try to see if we can cut or reduce, because we're going to ask you for more funds, just like in a regular home. You're cutting some things, and then you got to go put in some overtime. So same thing. We're going to look for more revenue, right? Everybody seems to be open to it. There seems to be a consensus. We need something. But the one thing that we haven't at least got any answers on is, at least here are some things that we might have to cut, depending on these things that are still fluid, because whether we do pass it as a council, there could be a referendum, I understood, I think from City Attorney Atchison or Josh. So there are some things that can happen no matter what we do. So I'm trying to think ahead. That way people know that we're tightening our belt, even though we have been, and there's no more latches, but we're going to have to cut another one, and then that gives us our, gives, those people on the edge that could react, just a little bit of, well, I guess, what choice do we have? They vote, so that's sort of my comments regarding the budget cuts are more on that end, if that makes sense.
It does, and I understand, and I don't mean to be, reactionary or painting an extreme picture, but the reality is we have in the city of Salem over the years restricted ourselves. We haven't expanded the fire. We haven't added a new fire station. We haven't expanded our police force, 6 new officers last year, but we still haven't filled those positions yet. So in those basic services, we're still very much where we were, 10 years ago. So our belt has been really, really tight. And when you look at the city from an operational perspective, as we saw with the report from Moss Adams, our staffing levels are across the board for almost every comparator lower than comparable sized agencies, both in the state and outside the state. So we're starting from a pretty tight perspective already. Is there stuff that we can do? Absolutely. Would it be painless? No way. Nothing that we would be taking out of the system right now would be without significant pain.
Thank you. Member Shioka, comment.
Thank you, Chair Gonzalez. One thing that I have a great deal of angst about is we have been constructing and opening many shelters, and the budget, let's say we take something to the voters and it doesn't pass, we're going to be in quite a predicament, in the sense that then we won't be able to staff these wraparound services. And then the public will still be very angry, because now we have even more homeless because they're coming out of the shelters. There's no one there to help them. And so that becomes a very scary situation. And yet that's the kind of very top level that we're putting it in the budget. And so I'm very anxious about having no funding for those. And then, of course, when would those funds run out? And looking ahead to that 5-10 year, how are we going to continue to manage unless we see money from the state again? And there's no guarantee about that. So those are the things that I'm getting very frustrated by, in the sense of how are we going to manage those? And so when we talk about cuts, yes, but what about all the things that we've been working towards, and then we can't even service them? Those are the fears I have. I'm not really asking a question. I'm just simply making statement.
No, thank you for your comments. Manishi, okay, any other questions, comments? Oh, Mickey, yes.
I mean, I echo Member Nishioka's concerns and I mean, probably what stands out for me is we have to have a balanced budget no matter what. And I don't see that we can cut our way. We can make cuts, we could shut down libraries, we can do things, but we're not going to make that much of a dent in it because we've cut so much already. But I understand where you're coming from, Chair Gonzalez. I realize we all have to live under a particular budget, and it's getting harder and harder and harder to do. Yeah. Even with minimum wage going up in July, it's not going to be that much. Anyway, thank you.
No, thank you, Barney. It's going to hurt all of us a little bit, I guess. Any other comments regarding 5B, revenue options to sustain city services? Oh, Member Barney.
You're getting tired of seeing my hand yet?
No, never, never. Don't worry.
One of the things I wanted to bring up is I don't know if we'll have a chance to talk about other revenue sources, and I'm not even sure this is potentially the time, because I think we should be open to other things that are just kind of small little bits and pieces and keep our eyes and ears open. One of the things I wanted to mention, though, was with commercial air coming to Salem, I'm assuming we're going to have an increase in our tourism industry. And I was wondering if there's any other way to perhaps capture and take advantage of that through other revenue sources outside of the transient occupancy tax. I'm just throwing that out there as a concept, as something we might want to look at. And then the other question I had is, we do have kind of quasi commercial air already at our airport through the charters. I think there are 3 or 4, I don't know how many charter businesses there are there. And I don't know if we are asking them to help us with some of the expenses we have in terms of upgrading the airport. I just wanted to throw those 2 ideas out there.
Those will be noted for sure. Thank you very much, Councilman Barney. Well, I'm not opposed to finishing the meeting early unless anybody has some other options or questions, comments, anything, any final words, Keith, Josh?
I appreciate the discussion. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
No, thank you. Thank you for your time, everybody. And have a great rest of your day. Take care.
Thanks. Bye.
Meeting adjourned.